By the time they placed the plastic chair in the center of the village square, the sun had already turned cruel. It pressed down on the zinc roofs, on the red dust, on the rows of faces gathering beneath the old almond tree, and finally on Amara, who was standing alone in the middle of all of it, as if humiliation had been carefully arranged for an audience. The chair was not for comfort. It was for display. A seat for the accused. A seat for a woman they had already decided was too small to defend herself. Her mother-in-law, Mama Doreen, sat stiff-backed beneath a canopy, one palm resting on her walking stick like a queen prepared to pass sentence. Beside her sat her husband, Gideon, dressed in an ivory shirt that had been ironed with more care than he had ever given their marriage. He did not look at Amara. That, more than anything else, made the air feel thin. On the wooden table in front of them lay a file, a Bible, and a folded document sealed inside a brown envelope. The village head cleared his throat. "This meeting has been called because peace has left this marriage." A murmur passed through the crowd. Women adjusted their wrappers. Men leaned forward. Children were pulled back by the wrist and shushed. Everyone understood spectacle when they saw one. Amara stood without speaking. Her yellow dress was simple and clean, though someone had thrown water near her feet while she crossed the compound, leaving a dark stain at the hem. Her fingers were cold despite the heat. She could feel the weight of eyes moving over her face, her body, her silence, trying to find shame before it was spoken aloud. Mama Doreen lifted her chin. 6 years, she said, loud enough for the back row to hear. 6 years in our family, and what has she brought? No child, no prosperity, no name that opens doors. Only quiet, only waiting, only disappointment. The words landed one after another, neat and merciless. Still Gideon said nothing. Then his sister, Selina, reached for the brown envelope and slid it to the edge of the table with 2 fingers, as though even paper connected to Amara ought to be handled carefully. "By sunset," she said, "this matter will be finished." The breeze moved through the square then, lifting dust, wrapper hems, and the corner of the envelope just enough for Amara to see the first line typed across it. Notice of dissolution. And in that burning silence, with a village seated to watch her collapse, Amara finally understood that they had not gathered to discuss her marriage. They had gathered to bury her inside it. Amara had always been the kind of woman people misread because she did not explain herself. She was 34, fine-boned, composed, and almost unnervingly calm. The sort of woman whose beauty did not arrive loudly, but stayed in a room after she had left it. She had grown up between rented apartments and unpaid school fees, raised mostly by her mother, Evelyn, who made a living hemming uniforms, sewing burial cloth, and mending the lives of other people with patient hands. Her mother had taught her how to iron a collar properly, how to leave a room before anger made a fool of her, and how silence, when chosen instead of forced, could become a kind of power. There had never been much money. There had also never been much room for self-pity. When Gideon Afalabi met her in the city, he had seemed like a gentler future. He laughed softly, spoke warmly, and told her he admired the steadiness in her. After a childhood of instability, steadiness had sounded close enough to love. They married quickly. Not recklessly, just hopefully. But hope in the Afalabi household became labor. Their family compound sat near the edge of a river village where everybody knew everybody's history, and half of what they knew was wrong. The walls were painted a fading blue. The front veranda always smelled of dry fish, palm oil, and old resentment. Mama Doreen ruled it like inherited territory. Selina, unmarried and sharp-tongued, floated through the rooms like a witness waiting for failure. And Gideon, once affectionate, began to change in small ways first. The kind of changes a woman notices before she has words for them. He stopped asking if she had eaten. He started correcting the way she spoke in front of other people. He let jokes about her pass without objection. Then he began making them himself. To the village, Amara was easy to summarize. She was the quiet wife from nowhere important. No father of influence, no brothers with money, no family convoy arriving at Christmas, no visible inheritance, no political connection. Just a woman who kept the household books better than anyone noticed, helped at the health center when nurses were short, and wore dignity so naturally that arrogant people mistook it for weakness. Only her mother had ever hinted that their history was not as simple as it appeared. There had been gaps in conversations, old photographs quickly put away, a signet ring tucked at the bottom of a sewing tin, letters that came once or twice a year from Lagos or London and were never discussed. When Amara asked, Evelyn would smile faintly and say, "Some doors are opened too early, and some names are safer before they are spoken." After Evelyn died the year before, Amara inherited almost nothing anyone could see. A Bible softened at the spine, a box of threads, 2 dresses, a tin of documents she had not yet found the courage to sort through, and grief that arrived in strange hours. By then, Gideon had grown ambitious. There were rumors of oil expansion near the river corridor, foreign partners, community compensation, land contracts. Suddenly, men who had never cared about paperwork began wearing cologne to afternoon meetings. Gideon started talking about positioning and family advantage. He spoke of wealth as though it were a room he had nearly entered. And little by little, Amara began to realize that in a house full of people obsessed with power, being underestimated was not an accident. It was the role they had assigned her. The cruelty did not arrive with one dramatic blow. It arrived in portions small enough to be denied. At breakfast, Mama Doreen would pass meat to everyone except Amara, then look up with false surprise. "Ah, I thought there was another piece." At church, Selena would tug Gideon's sleeve and whisper loudly enough for nearby women to hear. "If my brother had married where we advised, he would be sitting in a different section by now." At market, people smiled too carefully when Amara approached. Smiles made of gossip already swallowed. And Gideon, who had once carried oranges to her mother's hospital bed, became the kind of man who let insults settle around his wife like dust and called it ordinary life. One afternoon, while she was balancing the compound ledger in the dining room, he dropped a stack of brochures on the table. Fuel infrastructure, community partnerships, logistics. The pages were glossy, full of photographs of hard hats, storage tanks, polished boardrooms. He stood over her while she looked at them. "There are investors coming next month," he said. She lifted her eyes. "What does that have to do with me?" "With all of us," he replied. "If things align, this family moves up." "Then I hope they align." His mouth tightened. "That is your problem, Amara. You always sound as if life happens far away from you." She closed the ledger carefully. "Maybe because the decisions are always made far away from me." For a brief second, something dark crossed his face. Not guilt. Annoyance at being accurately seen. Later that week, she heard Selena on the phone in the courtyard, laughing with someone she knew from town. Yes, that one," Selena said. "Beautiful in a plain way. But beauty is not value. My brother needs a wife who can stand beside opportunity, not one who arrived with a suitcase and sympathy." Amara kept folding laundry. White shirts, pillowcases, a towel frayed at the corners. She did not let the cloth shake in her hands. The village had a way of making private disrespect communal. If a marriage cracked, everybody leaned close enough to hear the splinter. Men discussed it under shade trees. Women measured it while buying pepper. Even children sensed rank. They learned quickly which adults were to be greeted warmly and which ones were being slowly erased. The first time Amara realized another woman had entered the edges of her marriage, it was not through perfume or secret messages. It was through posture. Gideon began standing differently when he received certain calls. Straighter, more careful with his words, more eager to leave the compound. One evening, he returned in a pressed navy shirt she had not ironed, carrying a paper bag from an expensive restaurant in the city. "Who bought dinner?" she asked. He removed the containers from the bag without looking at her. "A friend." "A generous one." He turned then, irritation flaring. "Must everything become an interrogation?" "No," she said quietly. "Only the things that arrive home smelling of explanation." He stared at her, perhaps expecting a louder scene, perhaps wishing for one so he could dismiss her with ease. But Amara only set plates on the table. Her restraint unsettled people more than anger ever could. It denied them the satisfaction of calling her unstable. The truth surfaced in fragments. A woman named Vanessa Mark, daughter of a regional chairman connected to the incoming oil corridor deal. Educated abroad, moneyed, stylish, photographed at fundraisers. The kind of woman Mama Doreen described with reverent envy. Not because she admired women, but because she admired what power could do in a room. Soon Vanessa's name began appearing in the house without disguise. "At least that girl understands ambition," Mama Doreen said one evening while shelling peas. Selena laughed. "And she knows how to walk into a room with value." Amara sat by the window mending a blouse. "Then I hope she is appreciated wherever she walks." The room went still. It was not what she said, it was how level her voice remained. Weeks later, a courier came looking for her while Gideon was away. A silver car, a man in a dark suit holding a document folder. Selena met him at the gate before Amara could reach the veranda. They spoke in low tones. The man glanced past her toward the house, uncertain, then finally handed over a business card and left. "Who was that?" Amara asked. Selena folded the card once before answering. "Wrong address." "Then why was he asking for me?" He wasn't. But that night, as the household slept, Amara found the business card in the kitchen trash beneath onion skins and tea leaves. Marrow and Blythe, Legal Advisory, Estate Division Unit. Her name had been written on the back in neat black ink. She stood in the dark, card in hand, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant bark of dogs. Something in her chest shifted. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of a locked house when one window has quietly opened. From that moment on, the insults around her changed shape. They no longer felt random. They felt hurried. As if the family, sensing some invisible change in the air, had decided to finish humiliating her before the world had time to rearrange itself. And in the days that followed, the pressure mounted. The village meeting was held on a Saturday because Saturday guaranteed witnesses. By noon, benches had been set in rows. A canopy had been tied between two poles. Someone brought bottled water for the elders, and none for Amara. Even the details were deliberate. She had been told only that the family wanted clarity. But when she stepped into the square and saw the crowd, the table, the Bible, and Gideon's aunts dressed as if for ceremony, she understood that clarity was merely the respectable name they had chosen for cruelty. Mama Doreen spoke first. She listed Amara's failures with the authority of a judge reading charges. "She entered this family empty-handed. She has not advanced this household. She is too quiet to build influence. She has no lineage that strengthens ours." Then, after a meaningful pause, "And after 6 years, she has given my son no child." A wave of murmuring moved through the crowd, thick and ugly. Amara felt the words strike old bruises. There had been 2 pregnancies. One ended in blood before the 2nd month. The other ended in a clinic room where Gideon spent more time on his phone than at her bedside. After that, tests were suggested, then delayed, then used as weapons. Private pain had become public evidence against her. Gideon finally stood. For a dangerous second, she thought he might defend at least the truth. Instead, he buttoned his jacket, glanced toward the elders, and spoke in the voice men use when they want betrayal to sound reasonable. "I have tried," he said. "I have been patient. But marriage should move a man forward, not keep him standing still." The cruelty of it was not only in the sentence, it was in the calm. He said it as though he were discussing weather, not the dismantling of a woman who had once believed herself loved. Selina placed papers on the table. "These are the dissolution terms. She leaves the compound, releases any claim to family property, and returns to wherever she came from." Wherever she came from, as if she had washed ashore. Then came the final wound. Mama Doreen reached into a basin beside her chair and lifted out Amara's wedding wrapper, neatly folded. "You will remove our family beads before you leave," she said. A few women in the crowd lowered their eyes. That, more than pity, nearly undid her. Witnessed shame always hurt, but pity had a way of making humiliation feel permanent. The village head turned toward her. "Do you have anything to say?" All that noise, all those faces. And inside her, something went completely still. She looked at Gideon, really looked at him. Not the man she had married, the man in front of her, the one who needed a crowd to feel tall, the one who had mistaken her silence for emptiness because he had never possessed enough depth to recognize restraint. Then she lowered her eyes to the unsigned papers. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet the crowd leaned forward to catch it. "I have heard all of you." Nothing more. No pleading, no defense, no tears they could retell later. She did not sign. She did not remove the beads. She simply turned, walked back through the crowd, and left them with the discomfort of a humiliation that did not produce the collapse they had come to enjoy. Inside her room, she shut the door softly, crossed to her mother's old sewing tin, and opened it for the first time since the funeral. At the bottom, beneath bundles of thread and a wrapped thimble, lay a sealed ivory envelope, yellowed at the corners. On the front, in her mother's handwriting, were 5 words. "Open only when they push." Amara sat on the edge of the bed, the square outside still buzzing with her disgrace, and broke the seal. That was the moment she made her decision. Not to fight them with noise, to answer them with truth. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a letter from her mother, a signet ring wrapped in muslin, and a second envelope unopened, addressed from Marrow and Blythe Legal Advisory. Amara read her mother's letter twice. It was written in the firm, elegant hand of a woman who had spent her whole life refusing to let hardship make her careless. "If you are reading this, it means people have mistaken your gentleness for weakness. I prayed they would not force your hand this way, but if they have, then the time for silence has changed shape. Your grandfather was Solomon Vale. Yes, that Solomon Vale. He tried for years to find us after I left. I did not go back because I wanted you raised without the violence that follows men who build empires. But I kept every record. If the world ever corners you, go to the lawyers. Everything they need is there. Do not rush, do not beg, and do not let anyone decide your worth before you speak your name." Amara sat for a long time after finishing, the paper trembling only once in her hand. Solomon Vale. Even in the village, even among people who pretended not to care about the outside world, that name meant something. Vale Meridian Global was oil, gas, shipping, pipelines, terminals, refineries, power, money that crossed borders before breakfast. The kind of wealth discussed in numbers so large they stopped feeling real. $78 billion. It sounded less like inheritance than weather. Vast, distant, impossible. The next morning, before anyone in the compound had fully woken, Amara dressed in a plain navy dress, tied a scarf over her hair, and left for the city carrying only her handbag and her mother's envelopes. She did not tell Gideon. She did not ask permission. At Marrow and Blythe, the receptionist stood the moment Amara gave her name. Within minutes, she was escorted into a glass office where 2 lawyers, one British Nigerian and one older woman with silver braids, were waiting with expressions that were formal but unmistakably relieved. "Mrs. Amara Nwosu Afolabi," the older lawyer said, rising. "We have been trying to reach you for months." What followed unfolded slowly, meticulously, almost clinically, as though the only safe way to hand a person a different life was piece by piece. Solomon Vale had been her mother's father. Evelyn had been his only child. A brutal family split, public scandal, and security concerns had separated them decades earlier. After his death, a web of trusts, challenges, and succession disputes delayed the release of his final estate provisions. DNA confirmation, archived records, and her mother's legal filings had now been completed. Amara was the lawful primary heir to his controlling family trust. Not a beneficiary of convenience, not a minor stakeholder, the heir. They placed documents before her: holdings, board structure, private assets, voting rights, security briefings, international counsel letters, net valuation estimates that made the room momentarily unreal. $78 billion. She did not gasp, did not cry, but the world inside her shifted with such force she had to place her fingertips against the armrest just to anchor herself. The silver-braided lawyer watched her carefully. "You do not need to decide everything today." Amara looked down at the signet ring from her mother's envelope. Heavy, cool, engraved with a small crest. Something old and absolute. "What has my husband's family been negotiating with Meridian Delta Resources?" she asked. The lawyers exchanged a glance. "There is a proposed river corridor logistics project," the man replied. "A local intermediary company has been pushing aggressively for representation rights and land advisory fees." She lifted her eyes. "The Afolabi family." "We believe so." There was a pause. Then, very gently, the older woman said, "Would you prefer privacy while we begin formal transition?" Amara leaned back. Outside the window, Lagos moved in glass and traffic and ambition. A city built by people who understood that power often arrived wearing a calm face. "No," she said. "I would prefer timing." By late afternoon, plans were in motion. Not theatrical plans, precise ones. Security, succession activation, board acknowledgement, a temporary communications freeze, and one public appearance. Amara requested that all formal recognition wait until the Afolabi family's scheduled community partnership gathering 3 days later. She wanted witnesses, not because she craved spectacle, but because they had chosen an audience for her humiliation. Correction, she felt, should be equally well attended. Before leaving, she signed only what was necessary. Each signature felt like a quiet door closing behind one life and opening into another. At the lobby desk, the receptionist handed her a cream envelope embossed with the Vale crest. Amara held it for a moment, then slid it into her bag beside the unsigned divorce papers Gideon's family had pushed toward her. 2 envelopes. One intended to erase her, one prepared to restore her. When she returned to the village, she said almost nothing. She moved through the compound with the same measured steps, accepted no bait, answered no provocation. But those who were paying attention noticed she no longer looked wounded. She looked resolved. That night she laid out a simple ivory dress. No jewels except her mother's ring. No perfume except the faint scent of shea butter on her wrists. In the morning, she sent a single message to the village head. "I will attend. Kindly begin on time." And the house, though no one yet understood why, seemed to listen. The second gathering was larger than the first. Word had spread that the Afolabi family would not only finalize the divorce, but announce a business breakthrough tied to the coming oil corridor project. Men arrived in stiff traditional wear. Women came dressed for memory. The village square was swept clean. Extra chairs were added beneath the canopy. Even Vanessa Mark was there, elegant in cream silk, seated beside Gideon with the serene confidence of a woman who believed she was witnessing her own arrival. Amara came alone. No convoy, no performance. Just a white SUV stopping at the edge of the square, the door opening, and Amara stepping out in ivory, her face composed, her back straight, her mother's signet ring catching once in the light before her hand fell still at her side. The square quieted in a way that felt almost involuntary. She crossed the dust without hurry and took the seat offered near the front, not in the center where they had placed her before, but at the long table itself. A murmur rose at that. Selena's mouth tightened. Mama Doreen leaned toward the village head. Why is she sitting there? Before he could answer, 3 black vehicles rolled in behind Amara's SUV. Not village cars, executive cars. Doors opened. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, followed by 2 security officers, then the managing director of Meridian Delta Resources, whose face had appeared on newspapers, television panels, and business magazines for years. Conversations snapped apart mid-sentence. Gideon half rose, confusion flickering into eagerness. Vanessa straightened, suddenly attentive. The managing director did not walk toward Gideon. He walked directly to Amara. And in front of the entire village, he inclined his head. "Chairwoman Vale," he said, "thank you for agreeing to receive us here." The silence that followed was so complete, the rustle of the almond leaves sounded loud. Gideon laughed once. Too quickly, too thin. There must be some misunderstanding. Amara did not look at him yet. The silver-braided lawyer from Marrow and Blythe stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. "There is no misunderstanding," she said. "Pursuant to the succession instruments of the late Solomon Vale, we are here to formally acknowledge Mrs. Amara Nwosu Afolabi as principal heir and controlling chair of the Vale Meridian Global Family Trust." The words traveled across the square like controlled fire. A woman in the back gasped aloud. Vanessa's face changed first, not into shock, but into the colder expression of someone recalculating status in real time. Mama Doreen gripped her walking stick so hard her knuckles blanched. Selena stared as if language had deserted her. And Gideon, for the first time since Amara had known him, looked small. The village head stood up too fast and nearly knocked over his water. "Amara?" Now she turned toward them. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Soft enough that everyone had to lean in. "You called witnesses for my ending," she said. "It is only fair that they remain for the truth." The lawyer opened the folder. Documents were placed on the table, one by one. Succession confirmation, board resolutions, ownership charts, public notices. Then a second stack, community partnership amendments. The managing director addressed the square with practiced clarity. Meridian Delta Resources, on instruction from Chairwoman Vale, would proceed with a community-first development structure. The Afolabi family's intermediary company was removed from all negotiations, effective immediately, due to findings of misrepresentation, coercive contracting, and unethical interference. There was an audible shift in the crowd, the sound of opportunity leaving one pair of hands and turning toward another. Gideon stood fully now. "You cannot do this." At last, Amara faced him completely. "I already have." He stepped forward, desperation making him careless. "Amara, whatever this is, we can discuss it privately." A line almost made some people believe he still had footing. But power, once truly exposed, changes the temperature of every familiar word. "Privately?" Amara repeated. "After you brought the village to watch you discard me?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She reached into her bag and drew out the divorce papers his family had prepared. Then, beside them, she placed the cream envelope embossed with the Vale crest. 2 envelopes, side by side. An entire marriage reduced to paper and consequence. "You were right about one thing," she said. "Peace had left this marriage. But it was not because I lacked value. It was because you kept measuring me with a broken instrument." The village was utterly still. Amara slid the signed acceptance copy of the dissolution across the table. Not because he had forced her, because she was choosing finality herself. "I will not remain where I was publicly stripped of dignity," she said. "The marriage ends today, not as your victory, as my decision." Then she touched the second envelope. "This contains notice of a forensic review into funds your intermediary company attempted to secure under false authority. If there is money missing, it will be found. If there are signatures obtained through intimidation, they will be voided. If there are lies attached to my name, they end now." Gideon's face lost color. Vanessa rose quietly, collected her handbag, and stepped away from him without a word. The movement was small, but in villages and boardrooms alike, abandonment has a sound. It sounds like fabric shifting away. Mama Doreen found her voice first. "Amara," she said, and for the first time there was no contempt in it, only panic. "You should not expose family." Amara looked at her with a calm so complete it felt merciful. "Family," she said, "would not have built a stage for my humiliation." No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Then she turned to the village head. "In my mother's name, a trust will be established for the clinic, the school, and widows of this community. The project will proceed transparently, with independent oversight. No family will own what belongs to the people." That did it. The square broke into murmurs, then shock, then something else. Recognition. Not of wealth alone, of order restored. Amara rose. The managing director rose with her. So did the lawyers. So did the people who understood power better than pride. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply gathered her bag, left the 2 envelopes on the table like a verdict, and walked out of the square while the world behind her reorganized itself around her true name. What followed did not happen all at once. Ruin rarely does. It unfolds in layers, each one exposing what pride once covered. Within a week, the Afalabi family's intermediary company was frozen pending investigation. Men who had laughed too loudly at the first village meeting stopped visiting the compound. Calls went unanswered. A chairman who had once slapped Gideon's back in public now claimed he had never been fully involved. Vanessa Mark's family withdrew every social appearance connected to the Afalabis. Her name disappeared from conversation as swiftly as she herself had disappeared from Gideon's side. Selena stopped walking through the market with her old certainty. Mama Doreen, who had spoken like a monarch beneath the canopy, began sitting alone on the veranda in the late afternoons, staring at the gate as though disbelief might reverse time if she waited long enough. And Gideon discovered the particular humiliation reserved for men who build themselves on a woman's presumed weakness. He was not merely divorced. He was known. Known as the man who gathered a village to shame his wife and accidentally introduced them all to the woman he should have feared losing. But Amara did not stay close enough to watch. She moved into a restored guest house on land adjoining the old river road, quiet and breezy and far from the compound. Security was discreet. Staff were minimal. She refused excess where peace would do. From there, she oversaw the formation of the Evelyn Nwosu Community Trust, insisting that every board include women whose names had never previously been included in anything official. The clinic received generators and medicine storage. The school got new roofs, scholarships, and a computer room no politician could claim as a personal favor. A cooperative fund was created for market women and widows. And every time someone praised her generosity too theatrically, she corrected them with the same line. It is not generosity to stop theft and call it justice. People began to see her differently, but not always in the way wealth usually forces itself upon a place. Children still ran to greet her. Old women still blessed her hands. Men, some of them embarrassed by how they had sat silently through her humiliation, spoke more carefully around her now. Not because she demanded worship, because she had become impossible to patronize. One afternoon, the village head came to her veranda, carrying a carved walking staff and an apology too old to be elegant. "We failed you," he said. Amara poured tea into a second cup before answering. "Many people did." He bowed his head. After a moment, she pushed the cup toward him anyway. That was her way. Not reconciliation without truth, but not bitterness either. She had no interest in becoming hard just because life had tried to harden her. As for the Afalabi family, they remained where consequence had placed them, neither destroyed beyond repair, nor spared the cost of what they had done. Clean justice, earned justice, the kind that does not need revenge to keep burning because it has already done its work. And slowly, the village learned a lesson it would repeat for years in different words. The quiet woman had not been empty. She had been unannounced. On the first morning the river breeze felt truly cool again, Amara rose before dawn and walked alone to the small hill where her mother was buried. The sky was still dark at the edges, but softening. Birds moved invisibly in the trees. Somewhere below, a fisherman called out across the water, and another answered. The village, for once, seemed honest in its half-silence. She stood beside the grave in a plain white wrapper and held the signet ring in her palm. For a long time she said nothing. The ground beneath her feet held two versions of inheritance. One was vast, measured in ships, terminals, signatures, numbers the world respected on sight. The other was quieter, harder to count. A mother's restraint, a lesson in dignity, the discipline to wait until truth could speak for itself. In the end, she knew which inheritance had saved her first. The wind lifted the edge of her scarf. Amara knelt, placed fresh lilies against the stone, and allowed herself one slow breath that felt like grief and release arriving together. Not triumph. Never that. Triumph was noisy. This was something better. Settlement. The kind that comes when a woman no longer needs the people who misjudged her to correct the record for her. They had seen now. That was enough. When she finally turned back toward the waking village, sunlight was beginning to gather along the river in narrow strips of gold. Roofs brightened. Smoke rose from cook fires. A new day, ordinary and immense. Behind her, the grave remained quiet. Ahead of her, the road curved toward a life she had not chosen in the way people imagined choosing, but one she would now shape with clear hands and an unbent spine. And if the village remembered anything for generations after, it would not only be the fortune, or the convoy, or the day the mighty were corrected in public. It would be this: that dignity does not announce itself when it enters a room. It waits. And when the time comes, it stands.